Hey, welcome folks. Looks like I might be clipping a little bit in the audio. Let's turn my audio source down a tiny bit. Okay, welcome. Appreciate those of you who are already here at the beginning. Thanks for waiting. That's so nice. We're going to do a little bit of neurofeedback today and talk about anxiety. So thanks for joining me. And if you're here later on, just leave some questions and I'll get back to them later on. But if you're in the chat, lay them on me as we start to go, and we will see what we can see about how anxiety works in the brain. So my microphone is drifting here. There we go. Cool. All right, so let me see, have the chat open. There we go. So I'll keep an eye on your questions as you have them. Just lay them on me. And today I'm going to do a protocol, a neurofeedback protocol to begin, and then we're going to move into some sort of lecture-y type content around anxiety. First, anxiety in the brain, some cortical regions that exist, and support anxiety, maybe cause anxiety for some of us. And then we'll talk about non-neurofeedback biohacks you can do, different behavioral hacks and environmental hacks you might be able to do to impact that anxiety. But if you're new to these live streams, I always start with doing a short neurofeedback session, and I sort of walk you through what I'm doing to mostly demystify it a little bit so you can figure out what this stuff is. It's called neurofeedback. And then as we move into the brain discussion after that, some of the things that I'm doing in the session might make a little sense. So if you're watching this later, you can skip ahead 15, 20 minutes. I'll put a bookmark or a chapter mark in the video. Otherwise, if you're watching now, welcome. And I think I'm going to set myself up for some neurofeedback. So let's see. Today, I'm going to go in. This is Eager software we're using for neurofeedback. So I'm going to select myself as a client. There we go. And now I'm going to plan my session. Pretty straightforward. Okay, and I'm going to do a different protocol today. I've done some SMR protocols recently. I'm going to do an alpha protocol in honor of us doing a discussion on anxiety. So I'm putting some wires, or I will put some wires on two locations called FZ and PZ, or FZ and PZ for our European or Canadian listeners here. And I'm setting up some frequencies. I'm going to measure 12 to 20 hertz on the low side, which is a beta wave. And you can see Eager turn one of its boxes pink there. There we go. Now it's all cleared. When it turns pink, it means there's an error of space or something else in the box. And I'm going to measure frequencies to bring up in the low alpha range, 6.5 hertz to 9.5 hertz. There we go. I'm going to inhibit 20 to 32, which is a wide alpha. And I'm just going to run that for just a few minutes today, maybe 12. It sounds fine. We'll see if I want to do the whole session. Save that. There we go. Okay. So next step, now that I got my protocol set up, is to put some wires on my head. So what I'm going to do today is a location on my head called FZ, which is about here. It's over the anterior cingulate, which is part of the location, sort of cortical structures that produce some flavors of anxiety. The anterior cingulate is sort of like the CEO of the brain in some ways. It holds the project in your mind. It helps you decide what you're thinking about, what you're valuing, what's important to you. So the anterior cingulate is a powerful circuit, but it can sort of cramp up into high gear. And when that happens, we can become a little bit obsessive. So that's not always ideal. And then the posterior cingulate over the back midline, FZ and PZ, for those people who know their EEG locations. The posterior cingulate is focused on evaluating the outside world and integrating your behavior with it. So it does things like watch the road, heads up, and often these two circuits, the anterior and the posterior, get caught in high gear, mostly when the world isn't especially safe or predictable. And the one in the front tends to cramp up into obsessiveness or perseveration, where the mind gets stuck on the same thing again and again. And the one in the back tends to get stuck on rumination, sort of an evaluation mode, a threat sensitivity, where we're prepared to orient and deal with the outside world. So because I'm putting two wires in my head, I only need one ear clip. So I have some ear clips here, some silver ones. going to take one of those down from my bundle of wires, and we need some paste. So I'm using some electrolyte paste called 1020. And then for those of you who haven't seen EEG before, we're just little silver wires here, and really basic in terms of what it is, just solid silver. I'm putting some paste on it, and hanging it off my ear on the right-hand side. This is acting like a ground. And over here, I have a little EEG amplifier. This picks up signals off my brain, and I'm going to plug in a few of the wires into this to configure the signal that we're getting off of my head. So the ground wire goes into the green socket, and then I need wires on top of my head. Now, you may have noticed that I'm bald, and for those of you who are putting wires on bald heads, one trick is don't try to stick a pasted wire to bare skin. It'll just heat up and slide off. Instead, take a little bit of paste. Use my camera here. There we go. And that's about my FZ. And put a similar dab of paste on the middle of my flat spot in the back of my head. That's the PZ. There we go. Now I'm going to put some more paste on these wires. And what that will do is let the wires stick to, oh, wrong side. There we go. So these have basic little silver bits. You can see that in the camera. And so I'm taking that and I am covering it with some paste. And I'm going to take the spot on my head here and put that on. I'm doing this in a reverse camera too. So brain training, double brain training between the actual wires and trying to do things backwards. All right, I'm plugging that wire into the amp, and I have one more wire to put in the back of my head at PZ. Same process. I'm not going to turn around. You can just trust me that it's going on back there. Different color wire. Best practices are to use different colored wires when you're attaching them to your head. Not because the color of the wire really matters, but it can be really hard to troubleshoot what you're doing in real time. And if you have two different color wires, you can glance down at your amplifier. You can see where you plug things in. Okay, so now I have, is that in the middle? Let's see. That's close enough. You have about a centimeter of leeway from any perfect spot. And this is about my FZ. It's a tiny bit off to my, it's too far to the right. So let me move this to the left a little tiny bit. Make it, oh, perfect. That's close enough. All right, so let me close up my paste buckets. The paste will dry out over many hours, so if you leave your little paste open overnight, it'll get kind of hard, which is annoying. And now I'm going to start the game. So what I'm doing is going to the start, or the run button rather, on eager. So where's my mouse? There we go. Okay, bear with me for 1 second. My streaming software is taking over. There we go. All right, so run the eager session. And I'm just going to run a simple game today. I think we're going to do, anyone who's on the chat, and there's a 20-second delay, but if you have your favorite game, let me know. I might pick it if I see it fast enough, or I'll pick it next time. Let me actually run, let's do jump box. Haven't done that in a while. Okay, so what you're seeing is my blue screen here, the signals are taking a moment to light up. Let me get rid of that text title here. There we go. So you can see I have brainwave signals now. Go me. I'm making brainwaves. Proof I'm alive. I'm sitting here talking to you. So I got some good brainwaves going, and I'm letting them settle in. And you can see I've configured 3 different frequency ranges in the screen. As I page down or mouse down to select bands, you can see I've highlighted here 12 to 20, and that is my beta waves. And I'm making about 11 microvolts. So that's generally a brainwave cluster you want to go down. So I put my threshold at 20 microvolts, or 29 just above it. I'll adjust that in a second. Then we have alpha waves, 6.5 to 9.5 hertz. And I'm making about 12 microvolts of those, but you want those to go up. So I put my threshold, which is outlined in dark red here, at 9.5. So I'm going to hit enter, which deselects everything. I'm then going to hit F11, which will auto threshold everything, and F9. Oh, that was F8. Let me close F8. occasionally F8 can be a little crashy. Let's see if I can close it without crashing the software. There we go. Look at that. All right, so back to F9, which should auto scale. There we go. And as you can see, maybe a little bit as I'm scaling around, the boxes on that little game screen to the bottom right are jumping around because they're following my scale. And I'm going to manually scale the middle band, the 6.5. So I highlighted to it. And now I'm going to do function F9 to select F8 again. F8. Function F9, which selects the scale box, minus to bring the scale up. And as you can see, the middle box in the game screen is getting bigger because it tracks the size of the scale. Now I'm going to hit F11 again. Cool. And now when I hit F5, it's going to begin. So F5. You can probably hear in the background that there's a little bit of beeping happening. Maybe. There it goes. So what's happening is whenever my brain spends half a second making a lot of the alpha and not making as much of the other two, it's going to beep at me. And on the game screen, that middle box that's got the sort of winter scenery behind it, that is tracking the size of my alpha waves. So whenever my alpha waves get stronger and larger, that middle box is going to get bigger and bigger. It's actually starting to distort the screen a tiny bit, so I'm going to scale it back down to maybe 5. So function F9 to select the scale box, hit plus once. And see, I made my little game box a little bit smaller. And then F11 to auto threshold. Cool. So I'm just going to sit here and play the game while talking to you guys and answering any questions you might have. And we're going to run for about another 10 minutes of doing neurofeedback. And then I'll switch over to the lecture. So let me go and see if there's any chat questions waiting. Not yet. I see that there's a handful of people here, so feel free to lay on any questions you guys have for me tonight. Welcome. And if you're new to my channel, awesome. Thanks for showing up and checking out some biohacking. If you're curious about what this stuff is, please like and subscribe. I'd love to create content that gives you tools that you're interested in. And I'm preparing to drop a lot of videos over the next few weeks on specific topics. I have this Biohacking and Chill every Monday night, 6 p.m. Pacific, and we do different topics. Last week we did, I think, biohacking ADHD. A couple weeks ago we did biohacking procrastination. I had one on neurofeedback myths. So you can go back and check those out if you're interested. But mostly I'm here to hang out and answer questions with other folks that are interested in this style of taking control of your brain. And if you're shy, no worries. You can think of questions later and leave them, and I'll come back and I'll answer them if you leave them in the comments. For those of you who are on the chat, if you leave chat questions now, those generally don't show up later on unless we don't touch the video. If we edit the video, the questions are gone in the future. So if you do have questions that are important and you're putting them in the live chat, you might want to put them in the comments later on if they don't get answered. So I'm sitting here and neurofeedback is largely involuntary. I'm not doing very much with my mind. But you can see those boxes jumping around. You can see the size of the waveforms moving. So I just finished 3 minutes, and this is a pause now for 10 seconds. And so I'm training up my alpha waves at my anterior cingulate and posterior cingulate, and that's the neutral tone of those tissues, the idling tone, the resting mode of those tissues. So if you get stuck in fast beta in the front midline, we get kind of obsessive. And if you get stuck in beta in the back midline, we get kind of threat sensitive and worried. But I'm in real time right now measuring my beta waves, and we're applauding my brain only when it moves in the other direction, when the alpha comes up on its own, when the betas and the fast betas drop away a little bit on their own. Then the computer beeps at me. I get some movement on the screen, and it gives me a little reward. You probably can't see this on the small YouTube screen, but there's a little jumping box at the bottom, and it jumps as long as I am in reward, and then it stops wherever I stop getting reward. So a little gamification of my brain waves. And on that screen, we have 3 boxes. The left gray box right now is tied to my 12 to 20 brain waves, which is a beta wave. And that's something that I'm training down. The middle box is tied to my alpha. I'm training that one up. And then the rightmost box, which is currently white, I'm training down. That's the fast beta running 20 to 32 hertz. So brainwaves change all the time. And so all we're really doing is putting the computer next to where one person's brain is, and then giving it gentle applause when it happens to move briefly in the right direction. Because the brain's always moving. So as long as you can catch that movement and kind of applaud it, then we end up with a learning event happening. And the big trick in neurofeedback is the software adjusts the goalposts. Every few seconds, the software is moving itself next to where the brain's parameter is that we're training. And then it only catches the fluctuations in the proper direction and applauds those, and withholds applause if other things are happening. So passive, involuntary, operant conditioning is really the name of the game here. But it's kind of fun just to sit and, watch your brain waves and watch your game screen. Now, I'm a pretty experienced neurofeedback person. I've done a lot to myself as well as to other people. And essentially, people are always wondering what to do. Like, what should you do with your mind? Not very much. I'm kind of ignoring it, talking to you guys, but I am starting to feel something. So as this beta relaxes, I can kind of feel my mind getting a little more quiet, a little more chill. And it might be the alpha coming up to replace it, but I think it's the beta. I've been rushing around all day, kind of hot and sweaty, kind of a stressful day. And I've been, running lots of stress, lots of anxiety. And so glad I picked this topic to do tonight because I could really use this particular protocol. So at Peak Brain, we have a name for this protocol, the FC minus PZ, training down betas and training up the alpha. We call it the unclench because it sort of feels like you're unclenching your mind. And this particular protocol also works very, very well for things like tics, for OCD, and for PTSD, because those are actually all driven by these cingulate cortices. These midline structures that I'm measuring right now are the big drivers for holding things in your mind in the front so it can get obsessive, and for evaluating the outside world in the back so it can get ruminative or threat sensitive or worried, essentially. All right, so here I am about 6.5 minutes into the session. And I probably started feeling about 2 minutes ago. So that's a pretty quick impact. Most people feel a little tiny bit of something when doing neurofeedback. Usually that doesn't happen for the first session. It's usually somewhere in the neighborhood of like 3-4 sessions in. And typically what you feel the first couple of times you feel neurofeedback, it's pretty subtle. You sort of go, wait a minute, I might be feeling something interesting. And then it wears off like an hour later and you are convinced you just imagined it. It's one of those things. But then the next time you train the same protocol and it happens a little stronger and you feel a little more of that thing you were trying to get done. And you can then watch the after effects over the next few hours, that night in terms of impacting sleep, and the next day. So it's not really voluntary, but it's also this sort of process that's not that blind. Like you're getting effects, you're feeling something happening. And as you do different things to your brain, you feel different things after the protocols. You never believe in neurofeedback quite so much as when you train the wrong way for your brain and you feel wired or tired or a little bit out of it. Now it's transient initially and it does wear off, but those effects do happen. It's part of the process of training neurofeedback is not letting bad effects build up and instead tailoring the process as you go. I'm also feeling a touch of fatigue. It's nice and relaxing, but it's a tiny bit tiring as well. Hey, 6 of you guys here. Thanks for those of you who are showing up. Appreciate it. Feel free to ask questions in the chat about what the heck we're doing if you just walked in. You always can go back and watch it later, of course, but if you're curious about this neurofeedback stuff or about anxiety in general, lay it on me. Going to train my brain for 3 more minutes, and then we'll take the wires off and we'll look at some notes I prepared about anxiety, some different biohacks, as well as some different brain things about it. So you can let me know what you're thinking. Hey, Craig, thanks for showing up. Just kind of chilling. I appreciate you chilling, Craig. You can always come and chill. That's awesome. You can synchronize to my chill. I'll give you some chill. We can't do that, by the way. I should clarify. There's no such thing as like neurofeedback from a distance that you don't know is happening. About once a week, somebody pops up on a chat or our website or sends me a Reddit, and they're asking about like microchips and random, satellites beaming information into their brains. That doesn't unfortunately, happen. It's not a real thing. It's a sign that you're dealing with some schizophrenia or other thought disturbance if you think there's microchips in your brain, honestly. Except for those two guys that work with Elon Musk. They have chips in their brain, but no one else does. It's not a thing. So, but yes, maybe Craig, after talking a few times and chilling, maybe just your brain knows what to expect from the neurofeedback. So you're getting a vicarious chill. I appreciate that. So just to refresh, later on in a couple minutes, we're going to switch over to a little bit of a lecture style thing where I'm going to go through some notes and happy to answer questions at that time too. Yeah, Craig, I'm pretty convinced you're not schizophrenic. I didn't think you were actually thinking I was influencing your brain from afar. Have you done so? Hey, Elliot, have you done multi-channel coherence training? I have done a little bit of it. Yeah, I have the 4-channel multivariate coherence modules on our Eager machines, and I've done a little bit of it. The hardest part of doing 4-channel multivariate coherence is getting access to a good 4-channel multivariate coherence database, because it's hard to design the protocols. And I was working with Rob Coben for several clients and was doing 4-channel, and I must have done it with a couple dozen people. I just didn't find that it worked better, and it was actually maybe less predictable in some ways. So I've gone back to doing 1 and 2 channel training primarily, Elliot, because I don't find that I can get reliably better effects with 4 channels, and it's a lot more complicated for the individual to set up. So with added cost and complexity and no real increased benefit, I've kind of relegated the 4-channel multivariate stuff to a tool that I will use for certain types of people with big brain injuries, major autism, people with major degenerative neural diseases when their white matter may have issues. So for now anyways, I'm not actually using it routinely. Thanks for the question though. All right, so there's our 12 minutes. I'm going to quit Eager. Beautiful. And let me switch my scenes so you guys can watch the other video. Here we go. Take my camera a couple seconds to wake up, apparently. There we go. So now I'm lower down on the screen. Cool. All right, I'm gonna take these wires off while I'm prepping here. So, I'm a neuroscientist and a biohacker, and thanks, Craig. Appreciate the kudos and the demo. I'm a biohacker and a neuroscientist, so I tend to think about the world in the terms that I'm trained in. So I think about the world in terms of the brain world, anyways, in terms of the EEG. And the EEG is a cortical phenomena. It's a surface phenomena in the brain. The brain waves are not made everywhere. They're made in that surface. Now, the surface is a pretty thick layer with huge surface area, all wrinkled up and squished in there. But for the most part, only the surface of the brain makes EEG, makes brain waves. And other parts, while they have signals, don't have the firing, oscillation, standing signals that we call EEG. So when I think about the brain and people suffering, I'm mostly thinking about what I can see and show them in their brain and then take some control over. So for these little biohacking and chill discussions, in general, I'm going to be focusing on cortical phenomena and things that we can actually measure ourselves and things we can get access to. So this is not like the ultimate discussion on anxiety. It's more like what can we see and what can we take control over for anxiety. And I will give you a little bit of perspective on how it might actually work. Okay, so these are our biohacking perspectives on anxiety. And I want to talk about cortical regions for a second. So I've already mentioned during the neurofeedback sample that the front midline and the back midline are heavily involved with anxiety. Those are called the cingulates. And the anterior cingulate, the front midline, is like the CEO or the project manager of the brain. And its job is to sort of hold things in your mind, value things, and choose from among competing things you're focusing on. And posterior cingulate is back midline, and that tends to evaluate the outside world. So we end up with the orienting to threat, to danger, to safety. So let me actually pause and answer Elliot's question here. Multivariate's cool, but he meant to ask, oh, and synchronizing two people. Yeah, I've not done phase training within people. There's a couple people here in LA who do it. And of course, Tom Kalura does talk about it. Steve Cassell, I think, is doing it here in LA, for instance. He's a therapist who does a lot of relational work. I believe he's doing some of that work. I haven't found the interhuman training to be especially compelling in the literature, so I haven't really gone after that yet. It's something that I could see myself trying, but I haven't tried it yet, Elliot. So thanks for the question. All right, so back to the brain. We have our anterior cingulate in the front. We got our posterior cingulate in the back. What else do we have that might be worth talking about? Let's see. We've also got the right TPJ, the right tempoparietal junction. Let me go back up a little bit, overshot. So the right TPJ is back here behind the right ear, and its job is to bring the world into the mind, really into the self. It kind of brings everything involving the social world and the sensory world in, and we integrate it using that back right area. And so it tends to be involved with social anxiety, if we can't filter the social information, if we're finding people's eye contact intense, for instance. It tends to also deal with sensory information. So if you're mad at your friend for chewing too loud, or you're irritated by the background, sounds and light in the environment, that's that right TPJ usually. So broadly, it's about the outside world. In fact, the back of the brain is about the outside world. The front of the brain is the inside self. But this back right TPJ is about the integration of that sensory and social information. And then you can also see the occipital cortex, the visual cortex, which is all the way in the back of the head. When you close your eyes, it tends to go into alpha waves. It goes quiescent or idling. And when you open your eyes, that alpha is replaced with beta waves to process vision when you load up that system. However, those can get a little stuck too. So if you close your eyes and you, instead of seeing lots of alpha, if you see lots of beta waves in the posterior cingulate, in the visual tissue, the occipital tissue, that's a sign your brain is preparing to process vision just in case. We call that hypervigilance, where the brain's sort of going, all right, getting ready. And it can be a flavor of anxiety. We can also see broad flavors of anxiety all throughout the brain. I want to bring up some QEEG or some brain maps and show you guys a couple different examples. Let's see. Scroll down a little bit. So here's an example of a brain map or a QEEG. And this is somebody who has lots of beta waves you can see in the front middle of the head, right here. That's the anterior cingulate, really hot in high beta, which is fast frequency beta, regular beta waves, and a faster variant of alpha. This person also has some theta, which is like a disinhibition. So this type of brain map would generally produce a really busy mind that was kind of obsessive with the beta. And with the theta, things would keep popping into your head. So lots of thetas like biting your nails or having songs play in your head all day long. Lots of high beta is like having really intense, intrusive thoughts that keep spinning and cycling. So these beta waves can show up in all kinds of flavors of anxiety here at the cingulates, the front midline, that you wouldn't necessarily or think of the same thing, but they're kind of related. Basically, all the things in the OCD landscape, even if they don't look like OCD, will involve this front midline tissue. And that includes things like tics, or biting your nails, or having songs in your head, or having true OCD. So this front midline tends to select what you're holding in your mind, and when it gets stuck there, well, we're obsessive. You can see for this person, we also have some back midline beta, especially in the higher betas. And that means that that person's posterior cingulate is having a hard time relaxing too. So their CEO in the front is running around micromanaging, think of this, do this, think of this, think of this. One in the back is sort of going, watch the road, heads up, and it's kind of threat sensitive and outside world focus, kind of activated. So these were fairly uncomfortable anxiety type phenomena for this person. But one thing I want to point out about anxiety resources is they're not diseases. these are natural circuits, the anterior cingulate, the posterior cingulate. We all have those and we all use them. They just get a little bit cramped up when the world becomes less predictable, less safe, because the cost of missing that danger is super high. So the brain will almost over allocate resources to make sure you don't miss that tiger twice. So it's really quite understandable why the brain produces these strong flavors in anxiety, that these tissues are always in use, selecting and evaluating, and they're going to tune themselves to capture the degree of threat and stress you need to hold to keep yourself safe. So they can get stuck there because, again, the cost of missing that danger or that unpredictability later on could be very, very high. And so the brain would prefer to spend the resources to hold things and to evaluate things in your mind. Okay, let's see what else we have on this page. Okay, so here's a bunch of brain maps. This is somebody on the left, upper left. This is an executive function slide, but it has anxiety features. It's not quite as obvious, but I wanted to point out that for those of you who've seen my ADHD talks, this is a very ADHD slide. Lots and lots of theta means tons of disinhibition. However, there's a few other things that could be anxious for this person. And in fact, you can see from the top map to the bottom, we actually improved their theta dramatically, and yet a little bit of theta in the temporal lobe at the edge is still staying high. And that's staying high in the right temporal area, and some of that is posterior, which meant this person had a sensory integration issue and some social anxiety. So you can sort of see it here lurking in the back right of the head still. So that's that right TPJ area we talked about. By the way, this is a change map you're seeing on the top when they started to do neurofeedback, and in the bottom after doing 2 months of neurofeedback, they'd made these kind of changes in their brain, which in this person had a pretty big impact on both anxiety and ADHD. Okay, here's several people with pre-post maps left and right. And all of these folks did 2 months of neurofeedback. And the reason I included them is they're kind of a classic case. The upper left guy is somebody who was really shaky. All this extra beta you're seeing, and also this is connectivity patterns here in beta. This is a sign that someone's like hyperactivated, hyper stressy. And in this case, it was somebody who was drinking alcohol every day for 25 years. And when he withdrew from alcohol, this is a brain map where he's been sober for a couple of months. He's withdrawn from alcohol and the beta is just blown way up, all the way up. And it's producing a lot of chronic generalized anxiety. He was very nervous, very shaky, couldn't relax, couldn't fall asleep. And I met him and he was just miserable because he couldn't down-regulate, couldn't pull back and self-soothe, turn his mind off, etc. And that's him on the right after doing a couple of months of neurofeedback. So you can see all the anxiety dropping away, all that red dropping away is a chronic stress phenomena for this person that is not there. So you can see the blue delta is still blue, and that means his sleep quality had not yet been recovered 2 months in. It was a little better. You can see it's less coverage of that blue delta, but it's still pretty poor delta, which means he's not sleeping that well. And yet the beta waves have dropped away really thoroughly, which was evidenced by him being a lot more calm subjectively. Also, he could fall asleep at will by this point. He could decide to take a nap and just fall asleep. And he came into our office one day to prove it. Thanks for the kudos, Craig. Yeah, this was a fun, it's always fun to work with really acute cases when they get really, really changed, which often happens with people that deal with, for instance, alcohol in this case. So this guy was really anxious and may have used alcohol as a treatment for his anxiety, essentially self-medicating. He would have, a bottle and a half of wine during the day. When the wine would wear off to fall asleep at night, have Ativan and Ambien and more wine, and just got progressively more activated if he wasn't heavily medicated. And so you can see that in the brain, but you can also see how quickly you can make those changes. And by the way, those are not cherry-picked alcohol, the best guy ever. This is usually what happens with alcohol, with cravings and with anxiety that are driven by alcohol. You can usually drop them away. Okay, to here in the middle of the page, we've got somebody with a lot of activation in the right area, the right tempoparietal junction. I call the right TPJ the princess and the P, because it tends to find things kind of irritating and get activated by the outside world. And so again, you can have some social anxiety, some sensory anxiety, all kinds of interesting phenomena can show up with that. If you look carefully, other folks in this page have that same back right. The guy at the bottom here has it. Our friend the drinker at the top of the page has it. So if you have that back right and you have the front middle, like the guy does at the bottom, then you tend to have very specific obsessiveness. So the back right is the outside world, and the front middle is the sort of latching onto things. And when they're both activated, you get quirky kind of OCD features that are about the environment bugging you out, meaning something called misophonia, when you're really enraged by mouth sounds, people chewing and other small sounds, or claustrophobia, where you're feeling constrained by the environment, or believe it or not, agoraphobia, which is the need to feel constrained and being afraid by the outside world. They all involve those two regions. So looking at a brain map, you wouldn't know what someone's experiencing or the flavor of their suffering, but you might go, oh, wait a minute, your front midline's kind of hot. A little bit of obsessiveness or some anxiety where the mind is stuck. Oh, and behind the right ear is kind of hot. A little anxiety when the outside world's impinging upon you too aggressively. Interesting. So you can really use brain maps to walk through a lot of perspective with people, help them understand how their anxiety works. I was talking to two people today on the phone, and both of them, their big complaint was, why is my anxiety working this way? One 17-year-old and one adult. And they both were like, I don't understand why this is happening. I do all the things, I sleep hack, I take, good nutrition, good exercise. So why am I so anxious? And the question is going to be answered as we look at their brain. We'll be able to understand the flavors of anxiety, how it's working for them. And just looking at the brain will give us some strategies we can give them to start hacking away and making some changes, both neurofeedback as well as non-neurofeedback changes. And on that note, let's talk about some non-neurofeedback stuff, some other biohacking. So the first thing is HRV, heart rate variability. The vagus nerve, the 10th cranial nerve, it's the biggest nerve cluster in the body. About 90% of it goes from the gut to the heart to the brain. About 10% descends from the brain to the heart to the gut. And the heart changes its beat-to-beat balance, moment to moment, to keep you balanced between the activation tone of fight and flight and the rest and repair tone. So the sympathetic and parasympathetic, that balance point is to some extent managed by the heart integrating the ascending demand from the gut and the descending demand from the brain. So you can train that beat-to-beat heart rate timing and create more control over, can you balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic? Can you move into the proper mode at will? So HRV biofeedback, Heart Math makes a nice device. Lots of ways to do HRV, but the simple consumer way is to grab a Heart Math device, I think. You can also breathe. There's a lot of different ways of breathing to create increased heart rate variability. But if you're already anxious, the only thing to focus on is exhaling slowly. I've given you two different exercises here later on in breathing that I'll go into, but the big core takeaway for breathing is breathe out more slowly than you're breathing in, and you will drop away some of the activation tone. We also have neurofeedback for anxiety. I've already gone over some of the brain regions, but you can do here 3 different categories you might consider for anxiety. There's SMR training, sensory motor rhythm, which is that strip of brain that runs ear to ear, and training that one improves gentle body tension, it improves sleep, it improves reactivity, impulsivity, and that can have a pretty big impact on anxiety. You can also train the theta down on the front middle and train up some low beta for some people, and that gives you control over the cingulates. And you might just do alpha training. Early today in this live stream, I did some alpha training on FZ and PZ. I wanted to relax those tissues and give them control by giving them more alpha. And you can do something called alpha theta. And alpha theta is a hypnagogic flow state, access consciousness kind of training. It's useful for gentle trauma release. It's useful for giving you access to your emotions. And it's useful for like creativity and really strong, powerful flow. Now, you might not do that if you're actively anxious because it could drop you into your crap. But if you're trying to learn to navigate your internal environment, more language around your emotions, more understanding of how you're feeling, alpha theta is pretty amazing. So Craig is giving us a couple questions here. Any comments, experience? The vagus nerve stimulators. Yeah, vagus nerve stimulators or devices that drive the vagus nerve, you put them on your neck or your chest, they do work really well. But I think that I'd rather people learn to train their vagus voluntarily. It's not always possible, and you can use vagus nerve stims for everything from depression and anxiety to your gut. But vagus nerve stims that are like implantable ones, those tend to have side effects, dry mouth and you feel a little activated. So unless you need to go that direction, I think I'd rather you just do some HRV biofeedback and learn to regulate at the level of activation you wish to be at and not worry about reaching for an external entrainment device just to change your state. Now, that might be fine, but I'm all about making permanent changes. So, other questions. Craig saying, humming is working nicely for me. My daughter likes that better, as she says, I can't sing. Yeah, humming is great. And so is engaging with music as well. So either listening or even singing works very well to some extent because it requires an awful lot of resources. Both hemispheres have to be brought online to do music. It's kind of like there's you can do the dual NBAC. There's a psychological test called the dual NBAC where you're trying to remember what numbers came up, 2 trials ago, 3 trials ago, and it loads up working memory pretty aggressively. That actually breaks anxiety. So does doing things like digit span tests. If you really load up the working memory powerfully, it gets in the way of anxiety and you can kind of break the experience. And then bringing both hemispheres online and communicating powerfully together with humming is likely a similar kind of like occupying the resources you might use for anxiety instead. Okay, so walking tends to bring up, improve the HRV, essentially. So walking is a great thing to do, but you can also kind of use it as a walking meditation. You can walk and focus and anchor your focus at the same time. Also, walking is a huge good thing for the metabolism. The biggest muscles in the body move the most when you walk. You can do things like clear all of the blood sugar after a meal with a 10-minute walk without releasing insulin. So walking is powerfully healthy. And across aging, the ability to use the upper legs, the thighs, to sit and stand, to walk, is highly correlated with your ability to keep living. So if you can't bend down on the ground, sit on the ground, get back up on your own. If you can't sit in a chair and get out of a chair without using your arms, that's a sign of advanced aging in a way that your body needs to be maybe supporting you better. And the big legs are, the big muscles in the legs are the big piece of that get activated when we walk. Both the quadriceps and then also the calves. As a little aside, the scientists discovered last year, the year before, the calves have a very special kind of energy metabolism. Calves don't tire out the way most muscles do. Like if you do a bunch of curls, your biceps get fatigued and you can't do any more curls. But your calves don't do that. The calves will actually sip energy from sort of the bloodstream in real time. They don't just rely on the stored glycogen, then burn it off and have to replenish it. They're kind of always able to pull energy out of your system because we're meant to walk all day long. So as a little aside, far away from the brain, but I thought you guys would appreciate a little geekery about walking. Here's those breathing techniques I mentioned. There's box breathing. We're kind of inhaling, holding, exhaling, holding. That can work really well. It's not just calming, it can be concentrating for some people. I'm a big fan of delay exhale. And here I'm calling it 4-7-8, where you inhale for 4, hold for 7, and exhale for 8. But honestly, once you're really strongly stressed and activated, all you have to do is gasp in and then constrain the exhale so it's nice and slow. And do that 3 times. And then repeat that. So if you can do that 3 times, generally you'll bring down your speed of processing, which slows down anxiety. It did for me just then doing it twice. Nootropics, smart drugs. I'm one of the founders of a company called True Brain, which makes some nootropics. I should disclose that. But in general, there's lots of nootropics that can work for anxiety. I'd encourage folks to avoid the sort of research chemical wild west of nonsense out there and only go after the nutritive, low-key nootropics that seem to have very positive effects with almost no downsides. Those include things like L-theanine, the amino acid found in tea. That's why tea makes you more calm than coffee does. Ashwagandha, which drops cortisol pretty powerfully at the end of the day. It's an adaptogen as well. And magnesium, which is used for all nerve health and for relaxing muscle fibers. So those are a good starting place. You could always go more in each of these directions. For instance, ashwagandha as a cortisol dropper, you could do things like phosphatidylserine in the evening as well to drop cortisol. Or L-theanine is GABAergic. It's bringing up alpha waves and bringing up GABA. You can do other things like GABA itself, which when mixed with L-theanine will become much more powerfully impactful than GABA or L-theanine alone. In fact, the literature suggests that if you combine L-theanine and GABA, you get 6 times the soporific, the sort of sleepy calming effect that you get with either of them individually. So it's a pretty big impact to do L-theanine and GABA together. Let's talk about some hormesis, hormetic effects, stressing the body out with a safe threat so it adapts to the level of stress. And the absence of that stress, you're actually healthier because either you can handle that stress or because you've triggered a healing response in the body. Hormesis, or the hormetic approach. A couple of very obvious examples that people are doing a lot these days are saunas and ice baths. They work very, very well for having you change the physical activation tone, so to speak. Okay, so Craig has some thoughts on magnesium L-threonate as opposed to other forms. Yeah, Craig, magnesium L-threonate is very brain focused and can be a little stimulating for some people. So can magnesium orotate. So magnesium is one of those things that no matter what someone tells you, they don't know how you're going to respond to magnesium. So I always encourage folks to try a few different types of magnesium and see what works for them. There's always a trade-off between the amount of magnesium you can absorb and sort of like how pure it is and how bioactive it is. You know, you could eat like literal elemental magnesium. You could eat it and it wouldn't have any, it would probably hurt you. You wouldn't absorb it and use it in your bioavailable tissues. But you could have something like magnesium glycinate, which is very, very powerfully absorbed, but isn't quite as bioavailable as things like, magnesium citrate, very strongly absorbed, not that biologically active. It's just more of an irritant in some ways. Magnesium glycinate is more active. And then you get up into like the compounds. I'm a big fan of ZMA, zinc magnesium aspartate as a compound. This has a lot of the same benefits that many forms of magnesium do, but it also gives me some zinc. And as a middle-aged dude, that brings up your testosterone. Zinc also helps increase the ciliary beat rate in the lungs. So you're likely to clear viruses and particulates out a lot faster if your zinc levels are sufficient. And also zinc itself brings up the immune system. So ZMA, zinc magnesium aspartate, is my favorite version, but that's just because of what works for me. People have to figure out how they like their zinc. If it treats them well cognitively, if it treats their stomach well. Different flavors of zinc will create different sort of looseness in your bowels. So you gotta be careful doing too much zinc or too many types of zinc at once. So I don't have a strong opinion in terms of form. I just encourage folks to play with the different versions of it and see what works for them. Craig, you like ZMA as well? Yeah, it's decent stuff. ZMA, one side effect, it's rare, but it can cause nightmares. So if you start having really crazy dreams after you start ZMA, back off on the ZMA because it's probably that. All right, additional biohacks for you guys tonight, some mindfulness and meditation. I'm a big fan of mindfulness. I think it creates control over anxious reactivity. I'm not a big fan for anxiety as an intervention for anxiety. I want meditation and mindfulness to be something you do so that you're less likely to become anxious and dysregulated. Once you are anxious, it's better to use other techniques and get out of that state, because meditation is simply a process of anchoring your attention. So that actually can anchor you onto the thing you're anxious about and re-trigger, re-traumatize you, cause some activation if you aren't careful. So I'm not a big fan of meditation as an initial intervention, but once you're not acute, once you're not in crisis, it's a powerful intervention for giving you tools over time. Next, we have sleep. Sleep is a big issue for many of us who have any kind of cognitive performance challenge. Sleep is always a thing to look at, because generalized anxiety tends to create deep sleep issues, sleep maintenance issues. Obsessive anxiety or ruminative anxiety creates sleep onset issues. These are really important things to optimize, because you can get away with it, but it's really sapping your resources and making everything worse. In fact, you may have to become more anxious when you're awake to cut through the fog that you've incurred because you didn't sleep as well last night, if the cycle continues to happen. And Craig, you're a big fan of guided imagery. You might want to grab one of Ian Hoag's progressive body scan recordings. He's one of our meditation teachers, which is a great thing to do at the end of the night to turn your mind off. And then last here for your interventions, dietary ones. I mentioned magnesium, but also omega-3s, antioxidants, polyphenols, probiotics. These actually all impact the brain because of the gut-brain axis. So it's really important to keep the sugar low, the protein high, the fat moderate, and the micronutrients dialed in. That includes leafy greens, microgreens, omega-3s, probiotics, short chains, long chains. Really get a wide variety of foods and try to keep your strongly reinforcing, heavily processed foods out of the mix, because they will create an appetitive, a pleasurable experience. And then the absence of eating that pint of ice cream, you'll be more anxious, more depleted, more depressed once you get past the dopamine hit you got from that ice cream or whatever it is. And then just a little conclusion about how biohacking gives you lots of tools and you can take a lot of control over your brain, but you have to know what it looks like. So I encourage those folks who are watching, come on in, get a brain map with me or with somebody else. But brain mapping is your friend. It'll teach you about yourself, and then it will let you change yourself, which is huge. Whoops, paged up. So I encourage folks to really get in there and do your hacking. Let me answer some more questions before we break tonight. Let's see. Elliot's saying, what's the most interesting pre-post experiment with QEEG, caffeine or something else? I do a lot of pre-posts, Elliot, for people, and caffeine is among the most powerful. It's striking what happens with caffeine, and people often get a mixed impact with some benefits and some downsides. I will say other folks, you get the similar kind of mixed benefit with cannabis. Some folks do Adderall, and you can see both good and bad. I think the thing that's important to test to do pre-post with brain maps is the stuff that's in your lifestyle. If you never have an energy drink, then looking at how your brain acts on an energy drink isn't that informative. But if you wake up in the morning with too much blood in your caffeine stream and you can't handle being uncaffeinated, okay, we should do uncaffeinated and caffeinated, because now we're going to see stuff that's very meaningful to you. I had a couple guys come in from Weed Maps years ago, from Weed Maps or Leafly, I forget which it was. And they were doing an article, and they both abstained from cannabis for 5 days. We did a brain map. They smoked some weed, did another brain map. And in one case, clean, sober, the guy looked foggy and anxious. And with cannabis in his system, he looked alert and clear. Basically, he was such a heavy user that he was in withdrawal 5 days in, really significant withdrawal, hadn't been sleeping, was in a bad mood. And the cannabis kind of put him back on track, and we saw it. The other guy was a more moderate user, and he washed out, and his brain looked typical without cannabis. And then he smoked some weed, and he got more impulsive, more alert, and faster, but he made more errors. And so you can kind of see this if you look at different phenomena. So I don't care if it's your Adderall, your cannabis, your energy drink, your tobacco, your nootropic stack. I've done actually a lot of nootropic stack hacking for folks where they will pick 2 or 3 blends from their favorite nootropic provider, Qualia, TrueBrain, etc., or they'll develop their own stack, dial it in over time, and then look at their brain with and without their stack to make sure that they're getting the reaction times and self-control they think they're getting. And I've seen a couple folks drop an ingredient out, put something else back in, and then test that. So you can really create this empirical sort of support experiment if you look at your brain with and without different substances and do a QEEG. Okay, more questions. From Radar Ashwood. Welcome, Radar. I got a negative reaction from HEG neurofeedback. Aha. It's now much harder sleep. Can EEG neurofeedback fix that? Yeah, very likely. Radar, there's a delay in this chat, but let me know. Do you know if it was NIR HEG or PIR? PIR looks like this. It's a big sort of blocky device you put on your head. But NIR is a little thin blue headband usually. So let me know if it was PIR, the big blocky one, or if it was NIR, the slim strap, because that'll change how I think about what you did a little bit. But generally HEG is a little stimulating for people, especially the PIR version, and it brings up blood flow pretty aggressively. It also brings up the metabolism and activity of beta waves in the frontal lobe. So if you're dull or depressed or have migraines or concussions, it can be really powerful, or autism, really powerful to bring up blood flow and kind of break up the cobwebs. But if you have some anxiety, and you're a little bit wired or you're obsessive and you train up the HEG signal in the frontal lobe, you end up more obsessive, more anxious, and unable to sleep. So very, very possibly. So blue strap radar. So the blue strap with the dot is the Tumum NIR, near infrared. And the one thing I don't know about that is where you did it, because PIR we train in the middle of the head all the time. But NIR you can move around and train on different locations depending on where you put the headband. So you may remember where you trained, like where the white dot was, if it was off to one side. And that might help me or somebody else kind of back out the phenomenon more quickly for you. But honestly, if you looked at a brain map, you would see a lot of frontal activation, and you'd probably be able to just dial in the protocols based on the EEG signatures of the sort of increased activation you have now, increased anxiety, maybe a little bit of perseverative stuff. If the HEG landed really poorly, you might be obsessing a little bit. But yes, that's something you can change with EEG neurofeedback in a more precise, more fine-grained, and a way that you can see on a brain map too. So it'll give you some confidence that you're working in a direction you want to work in. All right, thanks for the additional details, Radar. FP3, which is over here, FP4 and FPZ. Okay, so I am not surprised that you're having trouble sleeping. I would also wonder, given those sites you trained on, Radar, did you get a little bit angry? The right front corner here, if you train that up, FP4 you're calling it, that one can actually give us irritability, anger, frustration, even rage for some people. So I'm wondering if your side effects from the NIR HEG you did created any like activation, any anger or any frustration that was quite noticeable. I'd be curious. That might, it doesn't really matter in terms of if you did or not for getting changes, but if you did get angry or activated by right front training, it sort of explains why you are having trouble sleeping now, because you probably have some anxiety that you have to deal with. Otherwise, boosting the brain is going to feel very uncomfortable, probably. So I'm sorry you experienced that. Sounds kind of frustrating. Come get a brain map. I have a standing rule that if you have side effects from another provider, I'll do a free brain map on you and help you look at it. Without any obligation to do neurofeedback with us. You just come on and do a brain map. So the offer's open if you need some support. Let's more questions here from Farbs. Do we have any thoughts on anhedonia, that emotional numbness when managing anxiety with nootropics or pharmaceuticals? Yeah. Anhedonia, lack of emotional tone, lack of joy, lack of things being interesting. That can come up just as a function of depression, some dysthymia, but also it's kind of non-specific. It can show up all over the place. Anhedonia shows up with trauma. It shows up with strong burnout or brain fog from COVID for some people. It shows up from deep fatigue. So what I would really focus on is, what does success look like? If you didn't have the anhedonia, what would be going on? How would you feel? What would it look like? What would it mean to you? And then I'd try to find strategies to elicit that effect and double down on things that produced a little bit of lightness in your mood, your joy. For biohacking stuff, I'm not sure I have any really good like nootropics or pharmaceuticals. I mean, looking at a brain map, you can pick antidepressants often from a brain map that are likely to work. So for instance, right front corner theta tends to respond well to buspirone, and front midline beta tends to respond well to SSRIs. But that's just a general rule, as you might want to use the brain map as a way to guide some choices and some decisions. But other things that might impact your anhedonia from a biohacking perspective, saunas and ice baths, that hormetic stressor might actually break that experience up and create some joy, some endorphins, basically. Weightlifting might do that too. Weightlifting and resistance training actually builds brain tissue pretty aggressively. And so you might, a week or two into resistance training, develop some really solid, shift in your frontal lobe just through that bath of endorphins and plasticity you've built up. If you want to get super, targeted, you can do neurofeedback. I'm sure it would help your joy, your mood, your love of life. You could get a photobiomodulation helmet, a PBM helmet. I use the Neuronic device. I'm going to do a video on that in the next couple of weeks, but I have a coupon for the Neuronic Neuradiant. It's Dr. Andrew Hill, Dr. Andrew Hill is $100 off at the Neuradiant site for Neuronic. That really does produce decent mood lifts, energy, calmness, peace. So if you want like a non-specific, broad way to massage all that stuff, you can get a red light helmet. I like the Neuronic specifically because it has quadrants. You can look at a brain map and design pulsatile red light protocols that match your brain maps and get really good effects really quickly. So I'm a big fan of that. I would just try lots of stuff and see what lifts your brightness of mood. Is it exercise? Is it sleep? Is it meditation? Is it socialization? Figure out what it is and then try to double down on that and try to stretch out your ability to feel joy again and again. Hope that was helpful. Other questions? Radar saying, didn't get angry, but noticed slight back pain from it and seemed to raise histamine, made you more OCD. Yeah, that's just the general activation of your brain. Histamine's a master neurotransmitter, and that front midline is heavily involved with OCD. So as you raised up the power of your brain, that's the direction you cramped up into. So it just means you have a kind of a superpower brain, like a sports car that's burning oil. For you, Radar, you might want to look at something called NAC, N-acetylcysteine. That tends to really relax the front midline when it's over-focused, and it can work on medication-resistant OCD, and it might work on even calmness for you if we're lucky. So if you do try N-acetylcysteine, let me know. I'm curious if you get kind of a drop in busyness and stress internally from it. I think you might. Okay. Thanks for showing up, Craig. I appreciate it. Elliot's asking, we describe the common QEEG differences between depression and anxiety. Yeah, Elliot, great question. I've already talked about some of the anxiety signatures in the brain in this talk today. The anterior cingulate, posterior cingulate, right TPJ, visual tissue remaining active for hypervigilance. The right front corner gets lots of theta, and we get a feeling of overwhelm and dread. In general, the right front corner is an avoid system, and the left front corner is an approach system. And so you'll see literature, and people believe to some extent that you can look at an asymmetry, and the left versus right asymmetry is a signature for depression. And it might be, but it's not a valid or reliable one in the QEEG. It's informative, but there's no thermostat for mood in the brain. There are resources for individual aspects of anxiety, but mood is an experience. So while the avoid and the approach system are involved, our speed of processing is involved, you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell from a brain map someone's depressed, but if they are depressed, you can usually see it. So it's one of those things that's not really clear as a resource per se, but all of the anxiety flavored things that we give names to, those are usually about specific cortical resources, and therefore you can see them really clearly. You can change them usually, and you can understand what's happening as it goes. And it's less, in some ways, variable across people, unlike mood. Okay, so guys, thanks so much for your attention today. We try to run for about an hour, which we're coming up on right now. So it looks like I timed this one perfectly. So I really appreciate you coming to these Monday nights, either watching them live or hopping on the live stream later on. I have a couple people that I mentor who I know watch this on Tuesday mornings over their coffee while they're puttering in the morning, try to catch a few bits of brain information. So if that's you, awesome. Keep listening. If you're watching this later, please throw some comments into this video or another. Please like and subscribe. The algorithm really loves when folks go and leave comments on videos and they share them all over the place. And as you may have noticed, I have a tiny little YouTube channel. So super happy I could support those of you who are showing up right now. But if you have a moment, go and engage with a few videos of mine so we can get that out there to more people. All right, folks. Well, until I talk to you next, have a great week. Take care of those brains, and I'll talk to you soon. See you later.